The truck was barely in park when campus security flagged him down. James Rollins, Army veteran, was helping his daughter move in. To boxes left, no raised voices, just a warning. Move the truck or face consequences. Then came the cruisers. Step away from the vehicle. She's my daughter. I'm just helping her. The taser fired before anyone spoke again. His body hit the concrete. Emma screamed. By the time paramedics arrived, the video had already hit social media. And by nightfall, the country knew a veteran was tased on a college campus for trying to carry a box. And the nation responded. James Rollins wasn't the kind of man who demanded attention. In fact, most who knew him would say he avoided the spotlight altogether. He was the kind of American who did his duty, kept his head down, and lived by a code that had guided him for decades: honor, service, and humility. Born in 1951 in a small town outside Lexington, Kentucky, James came of age during a turbulent time in American history. While many of his peers questioned the military, James felt a strong sense of responsibility. He enlisted in the United States Army at age 18, fresh out of high school, with no fanfare and no send-off party, just a backpack, a buzz cut, and a quiet determination to serve. What followed was 22 years of unwavering dedication. James rose through the ranks with quiet authority, eventually earning the title of Command Sergeant Major, one of the highest enlisted ranks in the Army. Those who served under him knew him as the quiet storm. He didn't yell, he didn't intimidate, and he never pulled rank unless absolutely necessary. Instead, he led by example by being the first to rise, the last to eat, and the one who never took credit for a mission's success. James Rollins served in Operation Desert Storm and again later in Operation Iraqi Freedom. He didn't talk much about what he saw in combat, only that some memories are better kept inside. But among his medals were 2 bronze stars and a Purple Heart. When asked about them, he would just shake his head and say they belonged to the guys who didn't make it back. After retiring from active duty in 1991, James didn't slow down. While many of his fellow veterans settled into quiet retirement or private sector jobs, he shifted his service to the civilian front. He began volunteering twice a week at the local VA hospital, helping younger veterans adjust to civilian life, walking them through paperwork, or simply sitting with those who didn't have family to visit. But perhaps his most visible contribution was the work he did with Habitat for Humanity. In the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina and later Hurricane Harvey, James joined rebuilding crews, often driving hundreds of miles at his own expense to help strangers put their lives back together. He didn't look for cameras or press coverage. He just showed up with his tools and worked until the job was done. "If I still have to working hands," he once told a local news reporter who spotted him hauling lumber in 95 heat, "then I've got no excuse not to use them." James' personal life was not without hardship. His wife Laura passed away from breast cancer when their daughter Emma was only 10 years old. From that moment, his military discipline shifted into something even more personal, raising a young girl on his own. He never remarried. She was it. He once said, tapping the gold ring he still wore long after Laura was gone. Emma grew up knowing the versions of her father, the soldier, and the man who made pancakes every Sunday morning. He showed up to every school recital, waited in the car during every orthodontist appointment, and read the same bedtime story for months if it helped her sleep. He didn't talk much about his service unless Emma asked directly. Even then, his stories were more about the men he served with than about himself. In their hometown, James was known not for his medals, but for his consistency. He picked up trash during his morning walks. He paid for the coffee of the young Marine who just finished boot camp. He helped his elderly neighbor fix a sagging fence during the heat wave. There wasn't a spotlight in sight, but everyone knew who he was. So when James was tased in public, knocked to the ground by officers half his age, it wasn't just a man who fell. It was an entire symbol of quiet American dignity. This wasn't someone looking for trouble. This wasn't someone unfamiliar with discipline or respect. This was a man who had given his life, his youth, his body, his energy to a country that now stood by while he lay on the concrete in front of his daughter. He was, quite simply, the last man you'd expect to see in handcuffs, and yet there he was, unarmed, unthreatening, surrounded by flashing lights and cold stares. It wasn't just a moment of injustice, it was a moment of collective shame. The image of James Rollins sprawled on the pavement didn't just ignite outrage, it shattered illusions. If someone like him wasn't safe from this kind of treatment, then who? The irony was devastating. A man who had spent decades protecting the freedoms of others couldn't even park long enough to help his daughter move into a dorm room. The same man who had slept in the deserts of Iraq so that others could enjoy peace at home now found himself thrown to the ground for trying to carry a box. And that's who James Rollins is, not just a veteran, but a reminder of what it means to serve and how easily that service can be forgotten. It was mid-August, just after 11 a.m., and the sun hung hot over the campus of Crestwood College, a small liberal arts school tucked into the hills of southern Ohio. It was moving day, and like every year, it was chaotic. Cars lined every inch of curb space. Students hauled futons and mini fridges up flights of stairs, and parents circled endlessly for parking that didn't exist. James Rollins wasn't looking for trouble. He had driven 7 hours from Kentucky to drop off his daughter Emma, a first-year psychology major who had earned a partial academic scholarship. Emma had begged him not to worry about the logistics. "Dad, I can handle it. Just drop me off and go." But James wouldn't hear it. He told her the same thing he had said when she learned to ride a bike. "I'm not leaving until I see you stand on your own." They arrived just before the lunch rush, and every lot was full. After circling twice, James pulled his truck up near the back entrance of her dorm. The sign said, "No parking, service vehicles only." But half a dozen other parents were doing the same thing. James figured he could get her last 2 boxes up to the room and be gone within 10 minutes. As he stepped out of the truck and grabbed a heavy cardboard box marked books, laptops, important stuff, a campus security guard approached. The guard didn't yell, didn't demand anything, just pointed at the sign and said, "Sir, this is a fire lane. I'll need you to move." James nodded. "Just need 2 minutes to get my daughter's things inside. I'll be out of here before you're done walking back." The guard radioed something in, but didn't press further. James didn't think much of it. He and Emma walked toward the dorm, each carrying a box. He joked about the weight. She smiled. For a brief moment, everything felt right. 8 minutes later, just as they reached the sidewalk on their way back to the truck, 2 police cruisers rolled up quietly. No sirens, no lights, just 2 patrol cars pulling in fast and tight. Doors opened. 2 uniformed officers stepped out. One officer, stocky, buzzcut, maybe late 30s, walked briskly toward James. The other hung back but kept a hand near his hip. "You the one blocking the fire lane?" the lead officer asked. James stood upright, hands visible. "Just helping my daughter move in. I was about to move it now. You were told to move it earlier." The officer snapped. "I told the guard I just needed a few minutes. I'm not trying to cause a problem. Step away from the vehicle." James raised his eyebrows. "I'm not resisting. I just need to grab the last box." The tension was instant. The second officer moved in now, taser drawn. Emma, standing near the back of the truck, froze. The first officer repeated, "Sir, step away from the vehicle." James pointed toward the truck bed. "That's my daughter's suitcase. Let me grab it, and we'll go." The taser fired. No warning, no countdown. Just the pop of electricity, and the sharp gasp of a man who had spent years in the sands of Iraq. But never expected to fall like this. His legs buckled. His shoulders slammed against the curb as he hit the concrete. His body jerking from the voltage still pulsing through the wires. Emma screamed and dropped her backpack, rushing to her father's side. "He's a veteran. That's my dad." Students stopped walking. Some pulled out phones. One young man started filming. The officers shouted for Emma to step back. One began calling for medical assistance. The crowd thickened. "He didn't do anything," a girl yelled. "Why would you tase him?" another asked. A bystander, possibly a senior, shook his head and said, loud enough for everyone around him to hear, "Is this how we treat veterans now?" Within minutes, paramedics arrived. James was semi-conscious, but unable to sit up. Emma held his hand, her eyes wide with disbelief. One officer tried to explain to a gathering faculty member that James had been non-compliant. The word hung in the air like a lie everyone could see through. James wasn't cuffed, but his dignity had been dotted. It all happened so fast. From a simple request for a parking grace period to a man with military medals on his shelf lying on the pavement in front of his only child. The students kept filming. The video spread almost immediately. Within an hour, it had made it to TikTok, Twitter, and Facebook. But for those standing there that day, the story didn't need editing or narration or context. They had seen it with their own eyes, a veteran tased on a college campus for trying to carry a box. And as the ambulance pulled away, the silence left behind wasn't peace. It was the sound of a moment about to echo far beyond the campus gates. By sundown that same day, the footage had already racked up tens of thousands of views. The video was grainy, shot vertically by a student named Kyle Marks, but it captured everything. The moment James Rollins, a 72-year-old veteran, was tased. The sound of Emma screaming, the confusion, the silence afterward. No editing, no voiceover. Just a raw, painful scene that spoke louder than any caption ever could. Within hours, the hashtags began to trend, from honor our veterans to justice for James to taste for parking. Each post carried outrage. Some were short and searing. This man fought for our country, and now he's treated like a threat for helping his kid move in. Others were filled with disbelief. What kind of country do we live in where a man who wore the uniform is tased over a parking spot? But the post that cut deepest came from Emma herself. She uploaded a photo of her father in uniform holding her as a baby, next to a still frame from the video showing him on the ground with taser wires still attached. Her caption read, "My dad served this country for 22 years. Today, it couldn't spare him 2 minutes of respect." It was shared over 3 million times in 2 days. Local news was the first to pick it up. Veteran tased during move-in day at Crestwood College. But it didn't stay local for long. By the next morning, national headlines exploded. Decorated vet tased on campus. Crowd demands answers. NBC. He served his country. Then he was tased while helping his daughter. CNN. Crestwood College under fire after police incident goes viral. Fox News. What followed was a wave of national outrage unlike anything the college had ever seen. Veterans groups mobilized almost immediately. The American Legion AMVETS and multiple state VFW posts released videos condemning the incident. One Vietnam vet posted a tearful reaction. "I've seen a lot in my life, but seeing that man on American soil on the ground like that broke something in me." Other veterans joined forces. Social media filled with videos of veterans in full uniform, standing in front of courthouses, state buildings, and college campuses holding signs that read, "He took fire for you. You taste him for parking. We salute James Rollins, do you?" And respect is not optional. Within 48 hours, marches began, popping up across college towns in solidarity. At Ohio State, over 600 students and veterans staged a silent walk across campus, each carrying an American flag. Similar scenes unfolded in Pennsylvania, Texas, and California. Outside Crestwood College, a group of 30 motorcycle-riding veterans lined the main entrance, saluting every student who entered. They didn't chant or protest. They just stood there, quiet, composed, and undeniable. The Veterans of Foreign Wars, or VFW, issued a rare national statement. This was not just a procedural failure. It was an act of disrespect, plain and simple. Even political figures couldn't ignore the surge. A retired colonel, Andrew Matz, appeared on CNN to discuss the matter. His words would become one of the most quoted responses to the event. "That wasn't a taser to James Rollins. That was a taser to every veteran who gave this country everything. And if we don't speak up now, we're telling every young man and woman serving today that we won't stand up for them when it matters most." By the end of the week, James Rollins wasn't just a name. It was a symbol. His face became the avatar of a conversation much bigger than him. How do we really treat the people who served? Do parades and plaques mean anything if there's no respect in everyday life? The incident had struck a nerve. Not just about policing or campus policy, but about national character. And once the truth was out, there was no turning back. 3 days after the incident, the president of Crestwood College stood behind a podium in the university's main rotunda. Cameras flashed, reporters leaned in, and students packed the hallway. Phones held high. His voice echoed off marble walls as he delivered what was meant to be a heartfelt apology. "We deeply regret what happened on our campus involving Mr. James Rollins. We have suspended the officers involved, and we are reviewing our protocols to ensure nothing like this happens again." But the reaction was immediate and sharp. On social media, it was called too little, too late. A top comment under the university's post read, "You didn't suspend the taser. You suspended the man who pulled the trigger. That's not accountability. That's public relations." For most Americans watching, this wasn't about campus policy anymore. It had become a national test of values. The idea that a decorated veteran could be dropped by a taser while trying to help his daughter sparked a visceral response. People weren't just angry, they were personally offended. While the officers involved were placed on administrative leave, pressure mounted for more serious consequences. Protests outside the campus gates grew daily. What started with a few angry students grew into a coalition of veterans, alumni, parents, and even professors demanding real change. Meanwhile, Emma Rollins was overwhelmed, not just by grief and stress, but by an unexpected wave of compassion. Letters began arriving by the hundreds, then thousands. Some came from other college students. Many came from people her father's age who said they saw themselves in him. One man wrote, "I served with a man like your father in Fallujah. He carried me to safety. I will never forget that face." Packages arrived, care baskets, handwritten notes, even a full semester's worth of textbooks anonymously ordered and shipped to her dorm. Emma was also offered 3 separate scholarship funds, each one created in her name for students of veterans. One donor wrote simply, "For the daughter who stood by her father when the world turned away." As James recovered in a nearby VA hospital, the support became impossible to ignore. Veterans groups across the country began organizing, not just social media campaigns, but action. A petition was launched on behalf of James and others like him, calling for federal policy requiring veteran awareness training for all campus police across the United States. In just 6 days, it reached over 3 million signatures. Then came the honor ride. It started with just a dozen bikers, veterans on Harley-Davidsons, wearing leather jackets adorned with patches from wars past. But by the time they reached Crestwood College, they were joined by more than 150 riders from 5 neighboring states. They circled the campus 3 times, each one carrying a full-sized American flag mounted on their bikes. The sound of rumbling engines, the fluttering red, white, and blue, and the silence of the crowd watching it wasn't a protest. It was a procession, a salute, a message no one could talk over. Inside the administration building, staff watched. From the windows, some students stood with hands on their hearts. Others held signs that read, "Respect isn't optional, honor is action, not apology, and veterans deserve better." But perhaps the most significant shift came from outside the college. Congressman Daniel Reeves, a representative from James Rollins' home district in Kentucky, and himself a Marine Corps veteran, spoke on the House floor. What happened to James Rollins is not an isolated incident. It's a symptom of a culture that too often forgets the very people who guaranteed our right to forget. We cannot teach American history in classrooms while ignoring it on our sidewalks. I am calling for an immediate congressional hearing into the conduct of police forces operating on public college campuses. The chamber fell silent. By week's end, a bipartisan coalition of lawmakers had signed on. Plans were in motion. Journalists began asking questions, not just of Crestwood, but of other universities with similar policies. It was no longer just about what happened, but what it revealed. James Rollins, still in a hospital bed with a bruised shoulder and a healing pride, had unwittingly become the face of a movement not because he asked for it, not because he wanted recognition, but because the country saw in him something too valuable to ignore. A reminder that honor can be earned in silence and sometimes defended with noise. Exactly 1 week after James Rollins was tased in front of his daughter, Crestwood College held its first home football game of the season. The air was heavy with anticipation, but it wasn't about the score. No one was talking about the visiting team. Everyone was waiting to see whether James would show up. Earlier that week, the college's administration had publicly extended an invitation for James to attend as a guest of honor. They offered a seat on the 50-yard line, a halftime ceremony, even free tuition for Emma. James politely declined. He told the college president through a short letter that he appreciated the gesture. But this wasn't about ceremony. It was about principle. You don't fix broken trust with a spotlight, he wrote. You fix it with change. But while James stayed home that day, America did not forget him. As halftime approached, the announcer's voice rang out across the stadium. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain standing for a special presentation in honor of all who have served. From the far tunnel, 50 uniformed veterans emerged, men and women, from every branch of the military, each one in full dress uniform. They walked in formation into the center of the field. No music, no fanfare, just footsteps and silence. At the 50-yard line, they turned to face the broadcast camera. One by one, they raised their hands in salute. No words, no applause, just a moment suspended in time, a collective tribute to one man watching from a hospital bed miles away. Back in Kentucky, James sat upright in bed, the remote in his hand, Emma by his side. The screen showed the field, the salute, and the quiet power of what respect looks like when done right. He didn't say anything, but Emma would later say she'd never seen her father blink so slowly, as if holding back something too big for words. That single gesture, a unified public salute, went viral within minutes. The footage was clipped and replayed on every major network. Veterans across the country shared it with the caption, "He didn't need to be there to be seen." But it didn't stop there. Later that month, James received an unexpected phone call from the White House. On the other end of the line, the President of the United States. The conversation was private, but James later confirmed what was said. He didn't try to excuse what happened. He just said, "We owe you more than that, and we're going to do better." That's all I needed to hear. Within days, James was transferred to Walter Reed National Military Medical Center, not just for a full physical evaluation, but for a ceremony and official recognition from the Department of Veterans Affairs. In a quiet auditorium filled with service members and their families, James was presented with a citation for continued service and sacrifice beyond the battlefield. The ceremony wasn't televised. James asked that it not be. He said, "This isn't about one man, it's about what kind of nation we want to be." Music, but perhaps the most lasting change came not from cameras or speeches, but from policy. Across multiple campuses, inspired by the public backlash and veteran-led advocacy, a new framework was adopted. It was called the Veterans Recognition and Response Act, a resolution mandating all campus law enforcement undergo specialized training in veteran awareness, trauma sensitivity, and respectful engagement. The policy emphasized one thing: service doesn't end when the uniform comes off, and neither should the respect. More than 60 universities nationwide adopted it within 3 months. Others followed. Crestwood College was among the first to implement the full training program. This time, they didn't hold a press conference. They simply got to work. The final echo of this story came not from James, but from Emma. At a university town hall broadcast statewide, she stood before a packed auditorium of faculty, students, and reporters. She spoke without a script, just a daughter speaking for the man who had spent a lifetime showing up for her. "My father never asked for special treatment. He never asked for attention. He never even told most of you what he's been through. But what he did ask for, what every veteran deserves, is basic dignity. The kind that doesn't disappear in a parking lot. The kind that doesn't get tased on a sidewalk. The kind that remembers service even when the war is over." The room stood in silence after she spoke. No applause, just reflection, because the message had already landed loud and clear. This wasn't about one incident. This was about a standard, one the nation had almost forgotten until a man named James Rollins reminded them what it looked like. The The story of James Rollins isn't just about a parking space or a mistake made by a campus officer. It's a mirror held up to a country that too often forgets the people who once stood in front of the line for it. A reminder of how easily quiet dignity can be mistaken for irrelevance in a world that moves fast, talks loud, and forgets even faster. James didn't ask to become a symbol. Like so many veterans, he preferred to let his service speak for itself. The rows of medals tucked away in a wooden box, the faint scars that never made it into photos, the posture that stayed military straight long after retirement. These are the markers of a man who gave more than he ever took and never expected anything in return. But that's the very issue this story reveals. In a society that celebrates service on holidays and in parades, we often fail to carry that same respect into ordinary daily moments. We post tributes on Veterans Day, but ignore the older man in line at the pharmacy. We applaud at football games, but avert our eyes from the disabled vet asking for directions in the grocery store. We admire sacrifice in theory, but we forget what it looks like in real life. As one veteran commented under the viral video, "You honor us in speeches, but not in sidewalks." Another wrote, "I didn't fight for applause. I fought so I wouldn't be treated like a problem when I came home." What happened to James was wrong, but the greater tragedy would be to see it, feel anger for a moment, and then move on unchanged. Because this was never just about James. It was about every man and woman who served quietly without cameras and came home expecting nothing but the basic dignity of being treated like a human being. It was about asking ourselves, do we still see them? Do we still value quiet sacrifice? Do we still know how to honor without needing a headline to remind us? James Rollins didn't raise his voice. He didn't fight back. And in doing so, he reminded us of the kind of strength that doesn't shout. In the end, the nation responded, not because it was told to, but because deep down, people recognized something had gone too far. That respect had slipped into symbolism, and that it was time to bring it back into practice. The story of James Rollins is not over. It lives in every moment we choose to see the veteran instead of walking past him, in every choice to respond with patience rather than power, in every reminder that dignity isn't a reward, it's a right, and it's one we should never have to fight for twice.